One of his quotes is that essentially a bad process will beat a good person every time. And about 85% of the variability that we have is due to the processes and not the people. Setting the default to be the correct answer is a big deal when you come to doing systems. Sometimes you would think these people have never received a positive word of thanks in their life. You're like, this made my week.
Welcome to the Canary Report, the podcast where risk leaders, safety professionals, and operational executives come for real-world stories and smarter strategies to keep people safe. I'm your host, Michael Zalle. In each episode, I sit down with exceptional leaders who are transforming how risk and safety are managed. Whether you're a leader of a nationwide EH&S program in a high-risk industry, or you champion workplace safety across 200 retail locations, this podcast is for you. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Canary Report, the podcast where risk leaders, safety professionals, and operating executives come for real-life stories and smarter strategies around keeping people safe. I am your host, Michael Zalle, the founder and CEO of Yellowbird. Today, I am very excited to have Blake Baldwin join us. He is the Director of Logistics Modeling and Integration at Tyson Foods, a leader of supply chain efficiency and innovation, and with over 2 years of experience at this facility and at this location, he comes from some of the largest and best organizations in the country, perhaps the world. He is based out of Arkansas. He is a SAP implementer. He's also a husband, a father, and a man who has volunteered, I read, and worked with horses. So I would love to talk about that a little bit because I'm very excited to hear about his equestrian adventures. It's always nice to hear about people's backgrounds beyond the work life. And he is a passionate mentor and educator on continuing improvement. And I am delighted to have you. So thank you, Blake, for joining me.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be here.
I want to start off with the personal because I think it's important that people know who you are and where you're from. Whatever you'd like to tell us about your journey, please tell us about you.
Very good. So you included on the equestrian piece, which I'll say is actually more my parents' thing. They have a rescue horse center down in West Fork, Arkansas, and I do help with that on the weekends and here and there. Right now, they have 4 rescue horses, which are either horses that are elderly and their owners no longer want, or a race horse that's past its prime. So they have horses that are ages, I think it's 10 to 30 right now, which 30 is pretty old for a horse. So that's the horse piece that you found. But yes, personally, so my background is in engineering. Mechanical engineering was my undergrad degree. I did go back to get an MBA for business because I saw a need in just rounding out my skill sets, which kind of brings me into the safety piece. Really enjoyed the space. I've dabbled in it at many different companies. And along the way, it's become just a part of who I am. You mentioned the wife. Kids. Have a wife, but she's a primary care doctor, so I get to hear about all the safety stuff from there. I have kids who are 7 and 10 who show me that I need to reiterate safety learnings every day, like holding the railing when you go downstairs, 3 points of contact, all that fun stuff. Even we were whittling yesterday on some sticks and getting that whole excessive force, like the direction of the hazard and all that. Like, you can pull it into your daily life. But yeah, wife, 2 kids. Personally, we have chickens as our animal of choice that we keep around. So we have about 10 chickens that we take care of every day. Great Pyrenees dog, calico cat. So that's our smattering of animals that we have at our house.
Awesome. And you are living and working in Arkansas. And what city are you? Is your town? Or how far from work are you?
Yeah, so we live in Cave Springs, Arkansas, which is actually in between. Most people know Fayetteville and Bentonville, Arkansas. So we're right between those two. So Northwest Arkansas is where we're housed at.
Fantastic. There's some wonderful companies, including Tyson Foods, which is your employer, and not far from there is Walmart, a former employer of yours. And so this is a delight to have you. You know, one of the things that I like to do is talk about, what got people into the journey of where you started your career. And you said you started as a mechanical engineer, you're trained as a mechanical engineer, which I find a lot of people in safety like the process and procedure, which mechanical engineering would be very much along that line. You're a precision type of an individual, I can tell from our conversations. how did you end up in your journey? How did you start and land where you are today? And maybe tell us about what you see the future.
Yep, indeed. And I'll keep my work stories generic just so that I don't out any one particular company because there'll be some that are fairly specific. But my first job that I had was in the chemical manufacturing world. Right out of school, it was a interesting place to begin producing chlorine gas, which is not the safest of things to make your first job. But it was one that really, to your point, taught me about the process and the need for process to mitigate risk to not just the employees that work there, but even the surrounding communities. Because that was one that you could have a severe impact on all those around you if you weren't sticking to the best practices and the process. So that was my first foothold into safety. I got to lead various safety components around shutdowns and making sure that our contractors that were on site that weren't typically on site were safe because that's non-standard work for them. And even for us, the shutdown only happened once a year. So that was my first foray into safety and gave me an appreciation for it. And then I've carried that forward with every job I've had since.
Yeah, you had made a quote to me, or a quote when we were speaking, that your first job, your very first job, you were surrounded by everything that tried to kill you. And I thought that was a unfortunate but also hilarious statement that, when you're working in that environment for your very first role, and you're a safety person and or you're responsible for parts of what, as all of us are, it's quite an education right out of school to go into that environment. So without, again, we're going to keep this generic. We certainly don't want to out anybody, but in that role, you said you had contractors coming on site, you had people that were there. What kind of protocols did you have to put in place? Because that is a very dangerous environment. There are very few environments I can think of that are more dangerous than that. When you're dealing you're doing large quantities. It's chemical. It's literally airborne. Airborne carcinogens and so forth. So it's very much you're. I can't imagine a more challenging environment to run safety protocols. So, what did you do for the external resources that came on site? How did you put protocols in place, and can you kind of educate us on some of that?
Yeah, indeed. So chlorine in and of itself, like we usually see, I'll say more liquid chlorine, like if you're thinking of the swimming pool where you put some stuff in your water. What we made was actually gaseous chlorine. So completely different process on how you, for context for those who don't know the chlorine background, how you make it. You just take salt water and you run a lot of electricity through it, and it gases off chlorine. And then it also gases off hydrogen, which if those two things ever touch, they explode. And there's lots of other fun things that happen. But my favorite example of what we did for the contractors that came on site, when you're bringing them on, you've shut down your process. So you're no longer making the gaseous chlorine. But there's other hazards at play because to dry the chlorine, you use 100% sulfuric acid, which oftentimes those contractors are getting into those towers, those vessels where that sulfuric acid has been. And so they do a lot of essentially big rubber suits to make sure that they're protected from that hazard. We have escape respirators and breathing systems that help us keep the air fresh and all that. But one thing that was important, because we typically have the same contractors come back every year, was we implemented a clean, dirty room where there's a particular substance inside those towers called hexchlorobenzene. That's the extent of my chemistry lesson for the day. Hexchlorobenzene, that is a bioaccumulating carcinogen. And so it means the more you're around it, the more likely you are to get cancer. So that was one that by having that clean, dirty room and making sure that that contaminated PPE never came in contact with their street clothes, we were able to keep those contractors safe because they're coming back year after year. They're the ones that are most at risk for having that hexchlorobenzene have some negative impact on their life.
Absolutely. Wow, it's a you don't realize. Somebody says, "Oh, I'm working at a facility and I have contractors." You don't realize that you are responsible and should be responsible for those who come in and out of the facility, even if for a relatively short period of time. So it's fascinating. So love that. That was your first foray into this journey. And then can you fast forward to the next stage of your career? I know you passionate about Six Sigma and went down this path from an operational efficiency and excellence perspective. Can you give us the further journey? Where did you go after that facility, and tell us about that?
After that, I went to work for a CPG company that used a lot of robotics. And so that was interesting because it was no longer chemical hazards, but now it's more like automation because a robot doesn't care where you are, it's going to run its programming. And so that was a lot of how do you protect the team members and the employees there from the hazards of the automation. So there was a lot of guarding, a lot of new OSHA regulations. That was fun because then it got into a different aspect of safety and that it was much more, I'll say, intentionally designed on the front end to keep the team members away from the hazards. So lots of guarding, lots of lockout, tag out, and safety systems. So that was fun. And then we got over into retail. I did retail supply chain for a bit. And that was, again, I'll say more physical in nature. So now you have lots of pieces of power equipment running around. You still have some of the automation, but getting into more environmental hazards is what we looked at there, which carried over into my current role as well.
By the way, I apologize. CPG for the listeners.
Yep.
What
sorry.
is
Acronyms?
Yeah, that's
Love
okay.
to have like a table of all the different standards out there. I didn't abbreviate hexchlorobenazine though.
We could do it. Yeah, you did great, but you could do a drinking game around acronyms in this industry, and it would be, everybody would be pretty wasted by the time we finished a podcast.
We would. Yeah. Consumer packaging goods. So just anything you might pick up off the shelf somewhere at a store, that kind of space.
That makes a lot of sense, particularly in the town and area where you are. And then you got into large retail distribution, and I imagine you were dealing with a lot of, you said, machinery and equipment, and so I'm making assumptions around things like trucks and trailers and forklifts and lifting and processing and all that kind of stuff. And what was your role in that environment at that time?
So that was one that inadvertently I connected with a few warehouse management system WMS projects over the years at different companies. And so that was my primary role in that space, also doing continuous improvement, operational excellence. But the systems piece was interesting because I didn't talk to you about this the first time, but setting the default to be the correct answer is a big deal when you come to doing systems. So like, for instance, is when we were rolling it out, if you're on a fork truck and you're driving around, you're trying to move a pallet from point A to point B. The default for that system was that you could look at that screen while you're moving, meaning almost like distracted driving. And so one default we put in there is that you have to have been sitting still for at least a few seconds before the screen can come back on. But that wasn't the original default. And so stuff like that, where you influence how people are interacting with their environments, whether it be physical or via system, just the consideration that goes into that and keeping people from the behaviors coming through that are unsafe.
That is fascinating. It's those little things. People often ask, well, what makes, when we have our assessors or surveyors or inspectors, we don't like to call them inspectors because reality is what they're trying to do is find the good that people are doing and then find areas of opportunity to improve without being a, cop. But it's that nuanced knowledge. I never would have even, by default thought about that. But you're right, it is distracted driving, and you're looking at a screen while you're moving a forklift with very heavy items on it. And, everybody talks about these near misses and things to that effect. Well, I'm sure you're going to have a lot more near misses, which is actually a good stat. I had talked about this on another podcast. A near miss is actually a good stat because one, you didn't have a miss, and two, or a hit, and two, somebody actually communicated that there was a near miss, which is an opportunity to recognize that, oh my goodness, that could have been really bad. We need, let's record it and let's figure out what we could do to improve. So from an operating procedures perspective, how did you track your progress in, you said that you turned off the screens, you had to sit for a certain period of time and did things like that. Are there any other examples you want to give? And then I'm curious on how you were tracking, if it can't be managed, if it can't be measured, right? And so how are you measuring? But first, what other examples maybe you want to give that's obviously not proprietary?
So that was from the system rollout standpoint. I'll say that was one of our big ones because when you think of a warehouse, there's a lot of movement of product around inside the building. So that was one that we had some direct influence over. But another piece that I am particularly passionate about is when we're going through and rolling out those systems, there's a lot of training involved with those. And we talked about this a bit on the pre-call, in that training in and of itself doesn't sustain for more than about a week. So if you're looking for value in training, then the true value comes from understanding your best practices, but then incorporating those into the environment where those team members are working. So that was a piece that we also did on these projects, making sure that we didn't just roll out 1,000 slide of content and then expecting a team member who has a day job to go through and they like rapidly having to make decisions on what's good, what's bad with this new system or this new technology. We gave them more guidance real time with visual control. And so that is the crux of a lot of what I do with continuous improvement, in that it's looking for what is a solution that's not only going to generate value for the company now, but will continue to generate value going forward, whether that be safety or quality or productivity. You're looking for what are those solutions that will sustain for you.
That is such a fascinating and important statement. It's funny. I'm a big racing fan. I like auto racing. I don't mind horse racing either, but I do from where you're from. But I like auto racing. In fact, I was watching the new F1, Brad Pitt movie. Was wonderful, by the way. Even if you're not a race car fan, it was just such. It was. Why? I don't know. I'm such a race car fan. Maybe it's not interesting to anybody else, but hey, it's got Brad Pitt in it, so how can it be bad? And one of the things that I learned when over the years, because my father's a race fan, and so I've grown up, probably like you with the equestrian piece of the equation. When you grow up with people who are passionate about something, it rubs off on you whether you want it to or not as a kid. And they say that an F1 driver can close their eyes and drive the track, knowing the turns, knowing what gear they're in, just listening to the car, knowing when to hit the brakes, knowing when to go into the turn. And I'm like, on every track that they race. And you think about that, there's hundreds of turns, hundreds of speeds, when to brake, when to accelerate, and they can do it with their eyes closed. And because they have such repetitive training, they're in these simulators all the time. And I think about it in our world, we give somebody a training once a year. We give somebody a online, process where they're probably eating a sandwich and they're looking at the question and they're going down this, this journey. And at the end of the day, all that's really happening is they're checking they're checking the checklist. They've got themselves, but are they really ready? And for folks don't realize that it doesn't take a lot to actually put a repetitive program in place if you do it right, engineering it out of the risk. So, well, sorry, I didn't mean to go on a diatribe, but I loved what you just said there, which is it's important that people don't just check the list, but they actually go down and say, okay, what can I do to reinforce this daily and make sure that people are making it second nature?
Yeah, indeed. Because even getting into, I've been part of a lot of safety investigations across many different companies. And regardless of what company it is or what division or anything, one of the main root causes that always comes up is that the person should have been aware of their surroundings. And that eats at my soul when I hear that because inside the operational excellence space, there's a guy named Deming. He has many quotes I like to steal. He's worth a Google. But one of his quotes is that essentially a bad process will beat a good person every time. And about 85% of the variability that we have is due to the processes and not the people. So if we only focus on the people and their behavior of they should have been aware, then we're essentially giving the process a buy. And we're not really getting into what's the most sustainable thing we could do because it's really easy to blame somebody or to retrain somebody or to fire somebody. It's harder to get in and evaluate why is that hazard there? How can we get rid of it? How can we protect people from that? It takes more effort. So that's one thing in particular that as we're going through inside engineering out the risk is treating people more as, I'll say, partners in the endeavor than a scapegoat. That's been very important in every company that I'm at.
You're very fortunate because it sounds to me like you have had organizations that embrace thought process and philosophy, because most organizations don't understand that, yes, it may be a little bit more inefficient to put these processes in place, and maybe not. Maybe you can do them with even better efficiency, which is the ideal scenario. But even if so, nothing is more expensive. And if you look just at dollars and cents, let alone the lives and families and community, but just dollars and cents. I always say one shutdown for an extended period of time for an investigation, it's going to be more expensive than any training or programmatic, systematic thing that you could possibly do. And folks don't realize it's the dollar saved is a dollar earned kind of a mentality. And that's difficult, especially when your compensation or your KPIs or key performance indicators are designed around non-safety metrics, right?
On the KPI piece, safety is a tricky one because you invest the money. How do you know if you prevented an injury? So it's sometimes a tough sell on that. But one thing I've also seen is that when you invest in safety, and the whole, you should have been aware of your surroundings. If you can remove the hazards that are there and people no longer have to be constantly aware, they can focus on your quality. They can focus on being more productive. And so I've had many safety projects that were focused on one specific element. But once we did that, yes, safety got better, but all our other KPIs got better too, because then the team members that were doing those jobs, they felt safe and they felt like they were valued and they felt like they could come in and work in a way that wasn't going to injure them. And so because of that, they returned additional value to the company in other ways besides just improving our OSHA rate.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because one of the conversations that I've had recently, I'm very, very fortunate, blessed to be able to speak with people like you. And one of the conversations I've had recently was with a gentleman who had a lot of moving parts, thousands of locations, thousands of trucks and warehouses and stores, and it's very, very challenging. And I actually want to get to Tyson Foods pretty soon here, but this is unrelated per se. I mean, it's kind of everything related. I said, look, at the end of the day, when you're looking at Yellowbird, you should just find the one thing that is most concerning. And he goes, well, what do you mean? I said, oh, it's like that old City Slickers movie, which most people aren't old enough to remember it. But, life is about your one thing, and everybody's one thing is their one thing, whatever that is to their soul and to who they are, that motivates them. But in business and in safety, often you can identify, if I improved this one thing, and maybe it's distracted driving, maybe it is forklift training, maybe it's lockout, tag out, whatever it is, and say, okay, I am going to focus this year on having somebody who is not the boss and not the company person, but an independent person to come out and train or reinforce or create better process procedures around X. You're going to materially change the culture of your world just by doing that. But the problem is, I don't know what it is. I will never know what it is for your business. And so it does take somebody like you, Blake, or a leader to say, okay, the one thing that I want to focus on that I think is going to make a material impact on my claims, on my risk management system, on my continuous improvement systems is X. So that being said, I would like to talk to you about your current business. So now you are in process and continual improvement supply chain operations for Tyson Foods, which is fantastic, a wonderful company, which you told me actually does as much or more beef than they do chicken, which funny because I referred to it as Tyson Chicken. You're like, actually it's Tyson Foods and we do more beef than we do chicken at this point. And I'm like, did not know that. So tell me about your current role and maybe some things that you're focused on.
I have a operational excellence team, which there's safety in there because if you're going into safety is a foundation for performance as well. I have a analytics team and a logistics and modeling / strategy team are my current scope. So a lot of getting in and identifying what's the root causes that are keeping us from reaching that next level of performance, whatever category that may be, and then using data to influence, but also getting back into the soft skills that are required for people because data is not really going to drive, I'll say, behavioral change. It's more how do you get people to care about the data that gets them to drive the change. And so it's packaging that content up in a way that people can understand the value in it and then working with other business partners to drive that forward.
Very interesting. So as an organization, where does your team or your various teams, do they touch every part of the business? Do they touch a specific area of the business? What is the emphasis for your directives?
Yeah, so right now, emphasis is more, I'll say, warehousing, some transportation, and some procurement are the spaces. Yeah,
Interesting. And so from a gathering of data and assessing the, I guess I should say, use soft skills or the interpersonal aspects of how to improve. Do you use any systems or have you developed any best practices around identifying, because it's something that we're very focused on. You could be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't communicate well and if you can't go and, really ingratiate the client or the site leader or the team, then you're not going to be successful. And so have you found any processes or procedures on the interpersonal soft skills, things like that? It's people always have triggering words around that kind of stuff, but for me, I'm with you. We know it is soft skills, and I'm just going to use it. I don't care.
yeah, indeed. And I'll say the first part of your question was around systems. So we really like the Microsoft Power Platform is what we primarily use. So getting into like Power Apps and Power BI and Power Automate, they like to work Power there. But yeah, that's one that I like because most everybody has a Microsoft system, and so then it's easy to integrate with other teams. We do use some other systems like Robotics is a very, I'll say, niche system that we use in the modeling space. It's also very expensive. But the Power Platform is kind of our sweet spot. And you were asking, how do we reach out and connect with people in a more human way? And so one thing we incorporated into our team is, I'd say most companies use a annual engagement survey that they send out, which the company I've worked at has done that. And there's always the grumblings of the workforce of like once a year, like you're just really polling the last few weeks of what's been going on with the company. And so how do you ensure that you are sustainably, I'll say, engaging your team and supporting them in a way that they want to be supported? And so we went and created a mini version of that we send out weekly. It's just 3 yes/no questions that gives us a finger on the pulse of the team members. Are they stressed out? Are they overworked? Do they feel supported? Those are our 3 yes/no questions. And we did recently change to a grading scale on that so that we could, but the intent is that it's really easy to do. It just takes a minute. That's via Power App. Is what we do. And so they hit save. It saves it back to a SharePoint site. And then we've also got another component for that that has been the most successful in that as they're doing that little mini survey, we also request for them to recognize somebody that helped them that week, their MVP. And we started this, I think, 3 years ago, and we've just crossed the 6,000th MVP that we've sent out, which seems, I'll say, a little bit trivial, but at the same time, when we send those out, I get copied on them. We'll send it up to somebody that helped them with, like, I had a support ticket that I put in, or my laptop wasn't working, and this IT person did a really great job. Like, I just want to thank you for that, which seems like part of their day job. But when we send it to them, we also copy their manager. And sometimes you would think these people have never received a positive word of thanks in their life. Like, this made my week. So we're intentional about sending that out Monday morning. So you get people on the input for the week. And just that gratitude, it's contagious because invariably we've seen that when you copy the manager, then they copy their manager, they copy their manager. At one point in time, I'm using this help desk ticket was a real one for me, and that made it all the way up to the CIO of our company. And so you had this level help desk person that's now being recognized by a C-suite officer. I was like, that's pretty awesome.
That's fantastic. We used to do something very, very similar, and it was on Slack. Again, we're very. You're used to very large organizations. Our organization is quite small. We only have, I think, 24, 25 people. We have about 7,000 approximate professionals on the platform and growing. But from a full-time employee perspective, we don't have very many, and we actually use Gusto for our HR, which is, there's a few kind of tech-centric small business HR systems, TriNet, Gusto, a few others, and they send out quarterly, and we've been doing the quarterly assessments and surveys for 5.5 years.
And it is interesting to see. The challenge that we always have is getting folks to engage in those and actually fill them out. And you don't want to harp on people to fill out your survey but the challenge is that if you don't have people embracing it and feeling motivated by it, that's what ends up happening is they just ignore it. And so you get low engagement, which means that they're not really interested in using that tool. So I find your weekly 3 questions with the kudos, or was it weekly you said, or monthly? Weekly. That's fantastic. And if it's only 3, almost anybody can take 30 seconds to find the good in somebody that helped them and reinforce the learning process that you care to learn about the things that are going well. It's fantastic. So you told me a story in our pre-interview that I want to ask you to explain, just because it was so fascinating to me, about the process of dealing with transportation of food, and particularly temperature-controlled environments. And I just found it to be so interesting, and I didn't know about it. So do you recall the conversation that we had around? So if you wouldn't mind, tell us about your process of delivery and how you, as an organization, have created such excellence in making sure that you are able to ensure freshness.
I'll say up until here recently, I was also working with the claims team. So that's the context that I'm coming at this from, is that we're the one that gets the report back from the customer saying, hey, this is wrong or that's wrong. So to begin that story, I'll say the logistics portion of that process begins once the product has been manufactured. And so picture you have a processing site. At the time that you have a box of meat, that's when it's now ours. And so we're responsible for that cold chain compliance from that point, really until the customer accepts it, the customer we're selling to. And so during that process, we have a lot of refrigeration in our buildings. We have different docks that have different temperatures. We have blast freezers. Like, there's a lot of different ways to get to the right temperature on whatever product that is. Because some of our product, I'll say like chicken, if you go to a Walmart and you go find some like frozen chicken, obviously it's frozen. And so it's colder than you would want for like a steak. You don't want to freeze a steak. And so there's different durations for how long something can stay in a different part of the building. But that's all dedicated or decided based on what product type it is. And so if it's a fresh product, then it's never going to get frozen. And really it has to be to our customer within a few days, or the meat starts turning brown. So Walmart won't have that. But if you've got frozen chicken, your shelf life is much longer. But at the host warehouse where you're attached to that production site, they are shipping from there. And so all of the trailers are refrigerated. And that is one of the main areas that you could have a deviation in cold chain compliance, because now instead of having a big refrigerated building that has the massive unit keeping it cold, you have they call them reefers, which was a funny term, but this little refrigerated unit on a truck, my truck. And that's what's maintaining the temperature quality for everything in there. So now you have one point of failure. And that was one of the more common things that we see, especially in the summer, as the temperatures go up across the U.S. You could have more of these temperature-related problems where en route from either the warehouse, like the production site, to a distribution center, or a warehouse/distribution center to a end customer, that's the chance of having something go wrong. And so one way that you protect against this is that you put something called a temperature tail on these trucks. And different customers require different types of this technology, but really all it is something that's measuring the temperature, not just a snapshot, but ongoing for the entire duration of that trip, so that when you get to that end customer, they can download that and say, yep, no problems there. I'm okay accepting this. And so that is one way that we validate the temperature sign. There's newer technology that's coming out, and we're trialing some of this that will also look at any kind of G-force, so any kind of jostling that goes on, because every now and then you have a load shift, or the door opened to that trailer when it shouldn't have been opened, because now you might have temperature control problem or even product tampering that's gone on. So there's a lot of new tech coming out that does more real-time tracking and could even alert us when it's in the deviation from standards, so we can proactively fix it before you have that problem. So lots of cool tech in that space.
And people don't realize, I mean, you're like, oh, well, you're processing chicken and beef and other items, and yeah, it needs to stay refrigerated, it needs to go out. But you think maybe of the old time rancher, and you guys are very sophisticated in how you're doing that, which is quite impressive. So the tail, the temperature tail, or whatever it is, that the tail that you referred to, how does that, from a functional perspective, how do you start it and how do you stop it? And is it required that people have this equipment all the way through, like the drivers and all that kind of stuff? Or how does it work, that you can tell me if it's proprietary, of course, but yeah.
Yeah, that's customer dependent on if they want it or if they don't. Most customers do, because it gives you that bigger product and wholesome. And it is a one-time use sensor that you put on the last pallet that goes into the truck. So then it's right at the door. So if something happens to open or something's not working, then that's the first pallet that's going to see a problem. So that's where it's located at. Then it is taken off at the customer, which if you have a multi-stop load, like if you're going to multiple places, then you have to have one of those for each stop. And that goes on the last pallet or the first pallet they'd be taking. So that's one that just ensures that you don't have any deviations along the way. So that when you get to that final destination for that customer, then they have surety that they're getting the product.
So it will show when the door's been open, it will show a spike or a drop in temperature. So it gives a range. You have historical data. And the claims process that it's not see, I'm so used to insurance and insurance claims and things like that, which may be what you're referring to, but it was actually product quality claims. Is that correct?
It can be. So it could be, I'm short product, or hey, I found some kind of quality problem with my product, or the temperature, because the temperature usually falls into the quality space. But there's a variety of different things that could be claimed.
Thank you for telling that story, because as I said to you on the setup call, nobody that doesn't live in that world actually understands the sophistication in the process. And I, as a process and procedural safety person, personally, I just find it to be very, well, first of all, very confidence building that I'm getting good quality product from Tyson and that people aren't going to be getting sick. And secondly, I could see as a business owner and as an operator, that's going to save you so much in returns and, discarding of bad product, all that other stuff. So it's fascinating. So now, in the final moments of our discussion, tell us about what you're passionate about, what you're working on. Is there anything that you have, pet projects or any other side projects or things that you're working on that you think are neat, or that you're researching or that you're investigating that you think are cool?
Yeah, indeed. So in my work life, just now got into the modeling space, which not like fashion modeling, but data modeling. So, yeah, no. But really, what level of inventory do you need to keep for which product to make sure that you have safety stock enough to meet customer demand? So that'll be a new space that I'm interested in and really digging and learning more about, just because it's very complicated. And then from a pet project standpoint, I do have a side hustle that I've been running for a few years now, but I'm ramping it up. And it's in the manufacturing space, but uses, so it's just me right now in the company, but we use a lot of like 3D scanners, CNC routers, just to make architectural details for businesses and homes. So that's a kind of a passion project of mine.
I personally believe, well, I should, because my entire company is based on access to side hustles and side projects and keeping people engaged by giving them the opportunity to leverage their knowledge and skills in other areas. And, the world gets very redundant and repetitive, and over time, you can kind of become lethargic, no matter what you do. And I'm a golfer, and it's funny because a lot of people don't know this, but I was born with one hand, and so I'm a one-handed golfer, because golf wasn't hard enough, I had to play it with one-handed. But I'm a decent golfer. But I always think about I've heard interviews with professional golfers that at the end of their career they hated the sport, and because they're hitting 1,000 balls a day, they're working out. It's a job. And no matter what, their livelihood, their career, their reputation, everything is tied to what they started as a sport that they loved as a kid or whenever they started it. And so it's same with the world that we live in our careers. Even if you love what you do, having a little bit of a extra thing to give you passion, and even if it's not for the money, even if it's just to keep your energy and excitement brewing, I find it to be wonderful. It's one of the value propositions for Yellowbird is that people sign up because you get retired people, you get folks that are at another stage in their career, and they say, yes, I like that I can make good money and that you guys pay well and that you insure us and all that other stuff, and I don't have to market and all that stuff. But what I really like is that I can actually go do some of the work that I haven't done in years that I really loved. I love doing a training. I like going and doing a process and procedure plan. Like if you were on our platform, which I would welcome you to sign up if you would ever like to, you could be the expert in, you could be hired to come and do a safety excellence process at a company that probably couldn't afford to have a full-time person like you in there, but but they could pay $5,000-$10,000 to have you come and do a procedure for them, a process for them to implement something to make it better, and you get to share your knowledge and gifts, which is what I'm excited about as an owner and as a leader of this company. So, last question, and it's kind of a self-serving, but not really. From a third-party perspective, do you use third-party suppliers that come in and help you measure and monitor and train your people as you're creating these systems? Have you had experience with that? And what is the process you've gone through before Yellowbird? Like, how did you do this before we existed?
Yeah, you're fine. So I've got, let's say, the curse of having worked at a lot of big companies that could foot the bill for having an internal team to go do that. However, one thing I have seen value in from a safety standpoint is I'll take my unpack thing, for example. We're kind of like a third party that's going into these warehouses that we don't typically work. So we're hired to come in and do work there. So I'm going to make this more like a Yellowbird play here. And that when you have somebody that's coming into a space for the first time, they see all the risks and all the hazards that everybody else that works there day in, day out have become complicated. And so that's something that almost being like an internal third party that goes into different locations will see different things that the typical day in, day out person who's in there doesn't see. And so then we're able to have those conversations on the hazards and propose some solutions that maybe we saw from other places, because you've also got the benefit of having seen lots of things. So the breadth of your knowledge is very wide. So from a third party standpoint, getting into to more, how do you identify the opportunities and then come up with almost like a menu of solutions that could fit to that picture. So that to me is the benefit of having a third party come in and potentially do one of those types of assessments.
That's fantastic. In fact, that's the best advertisement for third party services that one could get. And I do agree with you. It's also, one of the things I've found is that internal resources are perceived as free, and reality is that they're not. Either you pay their salaries, you have the people. Yes, you can have somebody come out, but all the travel per diem, all that other stuff, it's still an internal, but it's still a cost. And the other piece of the equation we're actually doing, interestingly enough, we're doing some work around, and you actually helped me with this. Thank you for giving the feedback on the onboarding. I asked you to take a look and you gave some fantastic feedback. So I appreciate that very much. What we're doing as a company is we're trying to integrate recommended services as part of the assessment as an automated process. And so you can go to 10 locations and that do exactly the same thing, and they'll have different hot buttons based upon what is, less than optimal scenario. Now, I'm, again, always focused on highlight the good. We want people to be recognized for all the good they're doing. But there's always, even if it's 1%, there's always something that we can improve. And so we're doing the same thing, that we're actually taking the findings and we're tying it to create would you like to have somebody come out and do an X? And at least if it's hey, we noticed that your forklift operators are having a lot of near misses. As I was sitting here, I saw 3 or 4 buzz by each other in a way that they shouldn't have. Would you like, and it will recommend a forklift training for that facility on a quarterly basis because, again, forklift drivers turn over 400% a year. So you're always chasing, how do I make sure my people are trained up properly? But that being said, it sounds like you do the same thing. When your people come in, they can see, even internally, they can see things that people are blind to. And I think that's true with everybody. You do get used to your environment and you get blind to risks and hazards because that's just the way it's always been, which I do not like that statement. So in closing, you made a statement earlier, and I got to tell you, I love this. I'm a very amateurish outdoorsman. I like to go out into nature. I live in Arizona, the hardest place on earth for you to maintain a temperature control for a Dyson truck. I can guarantee you that it's going to be 110 today. But I also do like going up to Utah and going to Colorado. And you said that you and your kids were whittling and you were showing them some stuff. So you obviously like doing some woodwork and doing that with your kids. I'm sure they absolutely love it. Can you tell me about that kind of thing? Do you do a lot of that stuff, or were you just hanging out with them and say, grabbing a stick?
My background, I was in Eagle Scout, so did all the fun outdoorsy things. My son is now in Cub Scouts. He's in his 3rd year, so he's just at that point where he's okay to handle a knife. But it's more the creative aspect of that and teaching them just some different skills and how to respect the different safety variables that are at play there. And they actually came up and requested to whittle yesterday. So I was like, that's fine, but you need to tell me what are essentially the best practices. Like, if you're going to go do this, then how do you do it safely? And so that could be the life lesson on just being able to assess what's in front of you to make good decisions.
Absolutely love it. So Blake, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation immensely. If somebody wants to follow you on social media or get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn is my primary avenue. I do also have my LLC on there. So if they wanted to connect via that, if they have a job they might need done for their house, then feel free to connect with me through there as well.
Wonderful. And what is the LLC's name?
Yeah, so the LLC's name is 7 Point Perspective, and it's on my LinkedIn profile. So that's probably the easiest way to find it.
Okay, and your LinkedIn profile is Blake-A-Baldwin. And so it's on LinkedIn, Blake-A-Baldwin. And I do recommend that you at least follow him if you don't connect with him, because you've got some great things that you've posted on there. And I thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to having you out with us again soon.
Mike, enjoyed being here.
That's it for today's episode of the Canary Report. If this conversation helped you reframe how you think about risk and safety, please do me a favor. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who needs to hear it. We're building a new category of safety and risk leadership, one that's faster and smarter. Leaders who aren't just empowered by tech, but whose wisdom is accelerated by it. To learn more about how Yellowbird's cutting-edge platform is empowering leaders to solve workplace safety and risk challenges faster, smarter, and at scale, visit goyellowbird.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Yellowbird pages to stay up to date. Until next time, lead with clarity, know first, and act fast.